Good morning and welcome to the Business Case for Decision Intelligence. This is a presentation of the Decision Intelligence Institute International in partnership with the Center for Workforce and Organizational Development at St. Louis University. I'm Margaret Johnson and I'm Acting Executive Director of the Institute, and we're very excited to welcome you here this morning. Decision intelligence is quite an interesting topic, and I'm certain you'll get a great deal out of what you hear today. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Dr. Lorianne Pratt. Lorianne is Chief Scientist with Quantellia LLC and is a pioneer in the field of decision intelligence. She previously served as Global Director of Telecommunications Research for Stratocast, which is a division of Frost & Sullivan, and also spent time at Bellcore as well as IBM. Lorianne has 3 degrees in computer science, including artificial intelligence and analytics, with a PhD from Rutgers University. She's written dozens of technical papers, white papers, and has delivered hundreds of presentations on the topic of decision intelligence, and it's our pleasure to have her with us this morning. With that, let me turn the floor over to Lorianne and let you get started. Lorianne?
Well, thank you very much, Margaret. Delighted to be here, and thank you all for your time and attention for the next few minutes as we talk about what's a very exciting and emerging business discipline that has a huge value for businesses as well as governments and other organizations worldwide. We're going to begin today by kind of dropping the slideware, and I'm going to show you a decision intelligence simulation to give you a sense of what we're talking about when we say decision intelligence. I found that showing is a lot better than telling, so let's just jump right into it. Let's imagine that you're a manufacturing company and it's your job to produce widgets. Here's your manufacturing facility over here in this picture, and one slice through your organization is you think about the revenues that your widgets generate, and that's based on the price. And it's also based on the volume. How many things do you create? On the flip side, there are costs, and those depend in part, obviously this is a simple slice through your reality, it depends in part on your production costs. Well, things are going along pretty well, and you're a profitable company producing your product for a global marketplace, and then everything changes. Suddenly, your government decides to impose a carbon tax. Well, you might have heard about carbon taxes. Carbon tax is a money that you need to pay the government based on the carbon emissions from your smokestacks. How much CO2 are you putting into the atmosphere? This introduces a lot of complexity that requires maybe some careful thinking about some decisions that you now face. So this is a decision intelligence simulation that you're looking at here. On the left-hand side are our decision levers. Decision levers are things that we have control over, and in this case, we can decide what our production is, how much of that old plant that we can keep online that has maybe more carbon emissions than we might ideally like, and we can also choose how much we're going to pay for new plant. Now the new plant has this benefit of lower carbon emissions, which we're going to measure over here on the outside, on the outcome box, but it also has a finance cost because we're going to be financing that capital investment. We're going to make an assumption, and this is called an external, something that I can't actually change, but I can move it in my decision intelligence simulation. And when I move it, that means I'm making an assumption about what the outside world will be, something that I can't have control over, which is the interest rate at which I can finance my equipment. But I am going to try to make an assumption about that. So let's assume my interest rate is at a particular level. As you can see, a higher interest rate leads to a higher finance cost, which leads to, boy, my revenues are in the toilet. And this is really what I'm trying to achieve. This green shape that's kind of underwater here, I want that to fill up the gray box and pop out the top. And what that represents is my revenues, or my net revenues, my profit. So if my costs drastically exceed my revenues, I'm going to be in this situation that I'm in right now. And that kind of makes sense because I don't have any production at all. My production volume's at 0, so I have no revenues. So what we're going to do in a decision intelligence simulation is experiment with various factors here. The production volume I have control over, the old plant I have control over. And as I do that, I can watch how that impacts things like finance cost or the carbon tax that I might have to pay. An interesting thing here are these green buyers. These are folks that if your carbon quantity is low, if this green carbon quantity is a low amount, they're willing to pay more for my product at the same cost. So really what we do when we think about decision intelligence is we say, what if I make these decisions? What if I put my production volume here and have a lot of this new plant and don't have any old plant? And I've played this game before, so I kind of know how to win it. And what you do is you turn down your new plant, turn up your production volume, have your green buyers spend a little time hearing about you, so they'll pay more, a higher price for the same product, kind of the Starbucks effect because they like you. And then what you can see happening is as I turn up my new plant, that net revenue is able to start getting into the positive territory. And ultimately, as I turn my production volume all the way up, you can see this net revenue amount slowly filling up this box. So that's a decision intelligence model. And in the rest of this presentation, we will talk about how you build one of those and how you get business value out of them. So let me turn this off and we'll go back to our slides. So what is decision intelligence? Decision intelligence is an integrated stack of advanced technologies that include the components shown in this pyramid here. Data management answers the question, what's in my data? Reporting answers the question, what does my data show? And I kind of use reporting as a general purpose word here. It includes business intelligence and business dashboards and other things like that. Predictive analytics, you might have heard of, helps me answer the question that says, if I look at my data and I look at some systematic patterns, how do they help me predict the future? Adaptive analytics says, as my situation changes, how can I create a new predictive analytics so that I can predict a new future? And then right on top of this is decision modeling. This is the newest part, and this answers the question, if I make a particular decision today, what will be the outcome in the future? So decision intelligence is this full stack of elements, and let's talk about why that's important and, again, what kind of business value we can get out of that. Well, we've all heard this kind of statistic that today an iPhone or a small computer you carry in your pocket is cheaper and really a lot more powerful than the really big computers that we had back in the 1960s and even the 1970s. An iPhone with 16 gig of memory costs $99, and one with just a few meg of memory, an IBM machine back in 1969, cost millions of dollars. So we've seen this just almost hard to conceive of shift in the power of the technology that we carry around. But essentially, we're still using this for basically what's electronic paper. We're taking a technology that we did have before we had computers, and we're sort of making it electronic as a piece of paper. And you know, we could ask the question, gee, you know, computers have come an awfully long way. Maybe we should be making decisions using more than spreadsheets. But today, the vast majority of business and organizational decision makers do use spreadsheets. And spreadsheets are terrific, don't get me wrong. They're great for organizing and visualizing data. But I think it makes sense to ask the question, shouldn't we be starting to look at some more advanced technology? I mean, video games and media are natural, interactive. They're visual, they're adaptive, and they're responsive. They're immersive. Shouldn't we be using a simulation like this instead of perhaps this, again, this spreadsheet in order to monitor our decisions? And so one way of describing decision intelligence is we're kind of pulling in some of that more advanced technology as well as some very cutting-edge science from neurobiology, causal reasoning, system science, deep learning, artificial intelligence. That's quite a mouthful, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's really an integrated methodology that helps us to really take advantage of some of this advanced technology that's come out in recent years, as well as some new science, complexity science. That's another really important one for decision intelligence. So let's step back. And I think it's helpful to realize that I'm not the only one who's realized this. And we've done a number of surveys. This is the result of one of them we did recently, where we asked executives whether they agreed or disagreed with a few statements. So here's one that says, we know how to predict the future effectively. Well, some of them do, but not all of them, and I think there's some room for improvement here. Here's another statement. There's several areas within our organization in which analytics could add more value, but new analytic capabilities are required. So here's a really strong agreement with this sense that we could go a little further with analytics and data and how we go about using that kind of technology within our organization. Here's another one. We could make better use of our predictive analytics if we could integrate data from multiple silos. Multiple data silos, interesting. Again, a lot of agreement here. And what's going on here is, you know, in the West, when we have a very complex organization, maybe a transnational company with locations in dozens of countries around the world, and you know, it's just too complex to manage just as one unit, we will typically break it down into pieces. And that decomposition, that breaking down into pieces, is something we do in many fields. What we're not so good about doing is then recomposing, is then saying if we make a change, let's see, I change my customer care operations, the guys who pick up the phone when you have a problem with your software. Let's make all of our customer care guys talk on the phone for less time. Well, that's going to save money, but that'll have an impact on my product, on my brand, and these cross-silo analytics end up being really important, and I think most people recognize we could do better there. This is the one I like the best. I believe we're sitting on a treasure trove of data, but we need to evolve our approach to analytics to understand it, to exploit it. So again, I'm just trying to point out that there's this kind of latent sense out there, there's this belief that we could do better with these analytic stacks. And I think most folks sort of recognize that we really are still in electronic paper. We haven't really evolved this technology to where it needs to be. And so what decision intelligence does is exactly that. It takes a number of existing technologies and unifies them together, again with advanced science, in such a way that we really start to get the power out of our computer systems and from our human experts in such a way that we can solve some of the great problems of the world. And when I say the great problems of the world, I really do mean them. The Millennium Project, which you may have heard of, has identified some of the great challenges facing humanity over the next 5 years, whether it's the gap between rich and poor, peace and conflict, the status of women, energy. It's interesting that they've identified a set of great challenges that we're facing right now. And the capacity to decide, I think it's wonderful that they chose this, again, as one of the great challenges. And it might kind of stand out for you because not everybody talks about this. But what this means is if we don't know the impact of our decision, the ripple effect, the domino effect of decisions, we're not going to make good ones. And as it turns out, when we make a decision about energy in a country, that's going to impact clean water, and clean water impacts the rich-poor gap, and the rich-poor gap impacts health issues. And we see a large number of interdependencies in the world, and so the capacity to decide means understanding those interdependencies, understanding when you make a decision in one part of a country or an organization, how that kind of ripples through and has these follow-on or sometimes called knock-on effects on the rest of the world. So as we talk about decision intelligence, we really are talking about the great, complex, difficult problems that exist out there. And the good news, though, is we've faced this before as a human race. And so here's a little analogy from history. If in the past we wanted to build a little house, we don't need a lot of expertise, right? We can just have a bunch of guys get together. They can probably build a dog house in a few days. But as we try to build more complex and larger structures like a house or an office building, we sort of hit a ceiling. We hit what we call the complexity ceiling. And if we don't start to do something new, if we don't start to organize ourselves and do what some folks would call engineering, we really can't get to the point where we're building skyscrapers. You know, the technology for steel to build tall buildings existed a few years before we were actually able to build them. And what we had to innovate is the ability to have a blueprint, a visual picture that kept everybody on the team aligned and gave them a visual, not a text, not a numbers, not a spreadsheet understanding of that very, very complex object, which was that building. And what we're saying today is that a decision is like a building. And just like a building, to get past that complexity ceiling, to solve the most complex problems of the world, we need a new technology. Just like a building needs blueprints and a 747 needs a CAD/CAM system, the most complex problems of the world really require something new, and that new thing is decision intelligence. Now here's a slide for you software people out there. Non-software people, you can take a sip of coffee right now. If you've been in the software world, you've been through this same transition. You've seen folks go into software engineering, which is when we started to build visual designs of software instead of just coding, instead of just having the guys and the nails in the wood building that doghouse. So a decision model is to decision making as object modeling is to software. So we're really kind of doing the same thing to a decision, treating a decision as an artifact that we can engineer. We did that to software about 20 years ago. From the point of view of our brains, it's no surprise that spreadsheets are kind of painful and really don't lead to the very best decisions. It turns out that we process data and also text and language through a tiny part of our brains called Broca's area. And you can see that Broca's area is pretty small. And in fact, there's a number of psychologists lately who have studied pretty systematically all of the bugs that Broca's area has in it. It's not just small, but from an evolutionary point of view, it's also alpha software. It's got some problems. It has some systematic, what we call cognitive biases, mistakes that we tend to make. And so when we use that spreadsheet, that electronic paper, it tends to get filtered through Broca's area. And we can be a lot smarter than that. We can start to get to the other parts of the brain. The visual and the motor parts of the brain as well. And that's, obviously what the guys who invented blueprints knew when they started building those buildings and CAD/CAM systems to build complex airplanes. Without a spreadsheet, we can get pretty frustrated and overwhelmed with numbers and with data. And there's been a number of books that have been written about this topic in recent years. I like this cover of Newsweek, Brain Freeze, how the deluge of information paralyzes our ability to make good decisions. And this is just a sample of some of the books about this decision-making ceiling that we keep running into when we try to build blueprints inside our heads, try to understand our decision models without drawing great pictures of them and having great kind of CAD/CAM tools for simulation that we can use so that we can have a shared understanding. All right, so let's get into, just for a couple minutes, a few of the specifics about decision intelligence. And if this has all kind of grabbed your interest, what should you do first? Just to return to what we talked about with decision modeling, is it answers the question, what will be the impact of today's decision tomorrow? And importantly, the rest of that decision intelligence pyramid we talked about earlier really doesn't answer that question. If you've got great data or great business intelligence or dashboards or reports, that will tell you what the data is saying today. It might give you a great summary or visualization about the data today. And if you're doing predictive analytics, it might help you predict the future. But it won't put all of the pieces together. It won't put all of your future predictions together with the decisions that you make to say, here's what the impact of today's decision will be on tomorrow, as we showed in that demonstration right at the start. So this fits in, decision modeling fits into a trend that we see happening in a few arenas where you might have heard about big data, and recently you might have heard about people saying, well, big data has been sort of hyped and we're sort of leveling out in our understanding of its value. And don't get me wrong, big data is hugely useful for many organizations, but there's a limit, there's a ceiling to what big data can do for us. What we're seeing start to emerge recently, instead of big data, is smart models. And a decision model, the way we're talking about it, is one kind of model. And I'll spend the rest of the slides in this presentation just giving you a taste of what we mean when we talk about smart models, whether we're talking decision models or other kinds of models that fit into a decision modeling paradigm. So every decision, and this is another piece of good news, all that complexity really can boil down to the fact that every decision has just a few very basic kinds of building blocks. Every decision is made up of a few decision levers. These are things that we can change, like the production volume in that demonstration I showed you earlier. It has a few outcomes, things that we are going to measure ourselves by, and then goals against those outcomes. So we might want to have 4 million in profit by 4 years from now. So the profit is the outcome, the 4 million by 4 years from now is our goal. Decisions also have externals. These are things like the interest rate that we might be able to change our assumptions about our externals, but generally we don't have control over the actual values of those externals. And then externals combine with decisions that we make through a set of cause and effect links, which we call intermediates, in order to impact outcomes. And again, you saw a few intermediates in the demonstration that we showed earlier, like the total amount that you're going to pay for carbon tax, for instance, or the total amount that you're going to finance your equipment for. So a decision model is one kind of model, but what I'd like to tell you about here is that it includes many other kinds of models as well. So for instance, we may have a forecast model that comes out of predictive analytics that tells us what the forecasted carbon tax is going to be from my country over the next few years, or what the forecasted gross domestic product is, or what the forecasted price that my competitor charges might be. And that predictive model is another kind of model. It's not the same as a decision model, but it fits into a decision model because essentially it can be used to create certain kinds of externals. A second kind of model is, there's a lot of names for these, but they're effectively cause and effect. They're things that connect two components, two intermediates in your decision. And machine learning helps us get these, inductive learning, predictive analytics gets us these, and randomized control trials in medicine, of course, can create this. So we might have a randomized control trial that says if we train doctors in a particular country, that will mean that 10% of additional patients get treated with a particular medicine because doctors need to be trained well in how to prescribe and then also administer that medication. So that's kind of a two-way thing. It's an if-then. It's a, if I do this, then what will the impact be? And those two-sided things are another kind of model that we study in machine learning and also in medicine. So what we're looking at here is three kinds of models: a forecasting model, a cause and effect model, and then a decision model which pulls it all together. Ultimately, there's really at least four kinds of models that decision intelligence pulls together, and we'll talk about those momentarily. Real quick, though, I want to say that we have some advances in various scientific disciplines that really help to inform these kinds of models. Forecasting, by and large, comes out of statistics. There's some great advances in complexity, systems analysis, collaborative work, gaming and AI, optimization, causal reasoning. These are all independent fields, but each one of them come together to inform how should we go about making decisions. Complexity is very interesting. It talks about how feedback loops and other kinds of behaviors within our decision model evolve over time. Importantly, those characteristics, those kind of emergent dynamics in a decision model, don't happen in a spreadsheet. And so a lot of this technology really illustrates why all the spreadsheets are really terrific. They are fundamentally kind of limited. And then those of us who come from the machine learning and AI world, we all know that they're great at getting us these cause and effect models. If I do this, then I do that. Importantly, all of this kind of modeling, all of this technology can be informed by data, but it can also be informed by human expertise. And I'm running out of time, so Margaret, I'm going to go kind of fast through these last couple slides. We talked about three kinds of models. There's also, of course, data models. Decision intelligence, and this is the take-home lesson. If nothing else, remember this one. Decision intelligence combines all four kinds of models with human expertise into a comprehensive visual framework for making decisions. And so the business case of that, all of it, everything we do in business is decisions. And so the business value really is everything that we do. I'm going to leave you to read some challenging ideas, things that you might do today if you think this is interesting. No, I have to say the first one. The news is so full of interesting decisions. Listen for decisions in the news and see if you can watch people trying to make the most complex decisions faced by the human race without drawing a picture, just invisibly in their heads. They're like the guys with the doghouse. And then see if you can imagine how you might help. Where are their levers and outcomes? And ultimately, how would you start to draw a picture of that decision? With that, Margaret, I will hand it off to you for Q&A.
Great, Lorian, and we've had a few questions come in. One of the questions is, you keep talking about the most advanced problems of the world, but I assume this also applies in my business.
Yes, and it's interesting. In my opinion, businesses and commercial organizations are in some cases having a bigger impact than governments. We see transnational organizations with trillion-dollar revenues, and the complexity that they face is absolutely astounding. And even if you're not such a huge business, we're seeing just the pace of change and the interconnected global nature of commerce these days really forcing us past that complexity ceiling. So you're absolutely right, Margaret, and to the questioner. My work in my role at Quantellia, we help a lot of businesses help to get some value out of better decision making.
So another question, how would this model help with disaster recovery? And I know you'll love that question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, we did a chunk of work pre-Sandy on the East Coast, understanding the interdependencies between different sectors within several states there. So, for instance, as I have a disaster and I'm trying to fix things, I might fix my electrical grid, but if I don't get my communications network back online, there's going to be a limit to how much the electrical grid works, and that's going to impact the trains, and that's going to impact the police, and that's going to impact victim services. And there's these very complex interdependencies. And unless we understand that, if each of those is acting like a silo, we're not going to be able to recover from a disaster as quickly as if we had a really great understanding of how those arenas interacted.
And a follow-up to that, would this help with before, during, and after disaster recovery?
Yes, before disaster recovery, we can do a planning phase in which we kind of simulate those interdependencies using a model like the one that I showed earlier. As a disaster is happening, the ability to kind of in real time simulate our decisions can make a big difference. But I think the biggest impact is during that recovery phase, after the first few days when the hurricane is passed or whatever it is the disaster, and we really have to rebuild the infrastructure. That's when this complexity really starts to get pretty overwhelming, and there's a lot of benefits of systematically understanding these interdependencies.
Okay, I had another question. How do you see this working with program and project management? And you'll need to answer pretty quickly because we have a couple more things to get through.
Okay. Project management, we've done a lot of work in that space, and as it turns out, most project management tools don't have a great interface to the business as a whole or to external factors, like how does the price my competitor charges for a product that I might be developing through a project, how does that impact my project? Sometimes I need to be agile and change the project to respond to that. Lots to say there, but I'm going fast. And then program management we often see isn't as well supported by tools. And so having a program management tool that understands those interdependencies between projects using a decision model simulator so we can understand and anticipate resourcing issues in particular can be very helpful.
Okay, let's go on to let folks know that we do have upcoming classes scheduled at the Center for Workforce and Organizational Development. Those classes will be on November 12th and 13th. You can certainly read the screen, and we will send you these links via email. We hope that you will consider joining for either session 1, which will be on November 12th. You have 2 times to choose, or both sessions, session 1 and 2, and you can choose any combination of 1 and 2 that works best for your schedule. That information is on the Workforce Center website, and again, we'll send you that link because it's a little long to write down here. You can also reach me, Margaret Johnson, at mj@tdi3.org. And we encourage you to explore the Decision Intelligence Institute International and perhaps join the organization. Membership in that organization, by the way, is free. So this webinar will be repeated on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and friends to attend. We do still have some space available and would be glad to welcome you back or welcome your colleagues and friends as well. And with that, we are going to close the webinar for today with our thanks on behalf of the Institute and on behalf of the Workforce Center at St. Louis University. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you found this to be a very good use of your time this morning. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.